The Holy Gospel is written in the 20th chapter of St. Matthew, beginning at the first verse. Jesus said to his disciples, "The kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire laborers for his vineyard. After agreeing with the laborers for the usual daily wage, he sent them into the vineyard. When he went out about 9 o'clock, he saw others standing idle in the marketplace, and he said to them, 'You also go into the vineyard, and I will pay you whatever is right.' So they went. When he went out again at noon and about 3 o'clock, he did the same. And about 5 o'clock, he went and found others standing around, and he said to them, 'Why are you standing here idle all day?' They said to him, 'Because no one has hired us.' He said to them, 'You also go into the vineyard.' When evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his manager, 'Call the laborers and give them their pay, beginning with the last and then going to the first.' When those hired about 5 o'clock came, each of them received the usual daily wage, which incidentally was 1 denarii, about 20 cents in silver. And when the first came, they thought they would receive more, but each of them also received the usual daily wage. And when they received it, they grumbled against the landowner, saying, 'The last worked only 1 hour, and you have made them equal to us who have borne the burden of the day and the scorching heat.' But he replied to one of them, 'Friend, I'm doing you no wrong. Did you not agree with me for the usual daily wage? Take what belongs to you and go. I choose to give to the last the same as I give to you. Am I not allowed to do what I choose with what belongs to me? Or are you envious because I am generous? So the last will be first, and the first will be last.'" Here ends the gospel for the day. Please be seated. It's amazing when you sit down with a text to try and get examples and things you can use for the sermon. It's amazing what comes to mind. Things that seem so insignificant a long time ago and possibly have disappeared from your memory, all of a sudden come to light as something that could be significant. And in looking at this gospel text this morning, I was thinking of when I went on internship in California. And I was invited to be at the home of a family who was a member of the congregation. And after the thing was over, he had 3 daughters, and the oldest one, I asked if she wanted to go out and just spend some time together. And she said, "Well, I'd like to do that, but we're in the midst of finals, and I don't think I really can't go because I need to study." And her father said, "No, you go. You need to go. You study too much. That is the center of all you're doing. Go out now and have some fun for a couple of hours, and then you come back." And the second daughter, who was 3 years younger, said, "Oh boy, I'm going to call Bob because I'm going to go out and party too." He said, "No, you're not. You're not going." "Why not?" "Because you spend too much time not studying, and you have finals tomorrow too, and I think it's time that you really put your mind to it." She said, "That's not fair. I thought you were supposed to treat all your children alike." And I know we'd studied this in psychology in our sociology classes, but it's the first time I heard somebody actually say it in a family. He said, "I can't treat you all the same. That would not be fair. Because each one of you has different needs. And I have to deal with you according to what I think is good for you, not what you think is good for you. That's my role as a parent at this time. Well, it grew into a little more of a conversation than I wanted to. We spent precious time talking about fairness. One of the things that I get involved in when I was in the nursing home business was dealing with families who are trying to probate a will. And the question often came up in the discussion on what was left to the individual children as to what was fair. Because very seldom did I ever see a family taking care of a will where everybody thought that everything was fair. Politicians stake their passing or defeat of a bill on whether it's fair or not to just everybody, which is an impossibility. When people lose faith and give up their faith, they say it's because I don't think God is fair. So the question today is then, is God really fair? You could read this text this morning and interpret it many different ways and place emphasis on a lot of different aspects of the parable. It's a parable of contrasts. Like the prodigal son, the contrast between the older son who is judgmental and the father who is forgiving. Like the rich man in Lazarus, the person who was involved in worldly things and really didn't have a purpose in life, and a poor man who really had his life in order, even though he was very poor and suffered. Contrast between the Pharisee and the publican, one who was humble and confessed the sins, the other was arrogance and told God how good he was for his kingdom. And in this particular text, we see a generous landowner and some people who made a bargain, made a deal, and then were upset because they were treated unfairly, even though the terms of that agreement were met in its entirety. And then it became about unfairness. We are getting our due. You're discriminating against us. Well, let's do a little background. Actually, that text is a pretty good description of what really happened in the marketplace in Israel at the end of September. Time now. It was a time when the grapes became ripe, and falling on that season, we usually get into a rainy season, which we would kind of like now. But the grapes, once they had ripened, needed to be picked pretty quickly or they would be destroyed. And if they got into a lot of rain, that would kill the crop. And so it was imperative on the landowner to go to the marketplace just as we go here. I know some of you have done it because I've done it too. We go down to a meeting place where people are standing, where they stand every morning waiting for an invitation to have some kind of job, to make some money. And we hire them for the day because we have something particular going on. We need their help. Usually they are jobs that we don't want ourselves or we think are too heavy for ourselves. But people waited in the marketplace, and those that were hired the first of the day were really happy because the average pay was 1 denarii. Equivalent to about 20 cents in silver, as we said. And that was really enough to feed the family for the day. So if you were to wait later in the day to be hired, you probably got less of a payment. And it would probably be barely enough to get by. So it was indicative of those people to stand and wait until they were hired And if they weren't tired by the end of the day, they probably would not eat at night. And maybe this is just a case of a generous landowner, and he was probably in a rut too because he needed his crop picked. The rains were coming. Maybe it was the evening before the Sabbath. We don't know what the situation was. But he wanted to get the grapes picked, the things done. And so maybe he was just willing to pay a little extra and happy that he could get somebody at the 5th hour or 11th hour, which is 5 o'clock. Just about closing time for quitting. But the question still is really, is this fair? Because that was the emphasis of the whole second half of the text. The people that got hired in the beginning of the day, who should have been really glad that they were hired and would get full pay for the day, they knew that their families were taken care of. But they got upset. They got upset because the others who didn't work as long got paid the same. It's not fair. And so often people are saying, this is what happened to me. It's just not fair. God didn't treat me like he should have. The problem with fairness is, first of all, that it differs depending upon who you are and in what situation you are. What I might think is a particularly fair thing today might not be fair to somebody else. There are most people try to live as long as they can and strive for a long life. And I go into certain nursing home rooms, and people are saying, God is not fair. Why do I have to live this long? Why do I have to suffer so much? Why couldn't he just take me? I found that with my first cousin in Minneapolis. Every time I visited, it was a long lingo of, I don't know what God's got in mind. He just should take me. It's my time. Some people would say a promotion is a great thing. Other people say, well, even though I've worked as long as somebody else and I'm capable, I don't want a promotion. I don't want that responsibility. It's a curse. Fairness is always in the eyes of the beholder. And one child thinks about the way the parent treats them is different from the way the other child thinks they treat them. Secondly, sometimes unexpected benefits come from hardship. You know, that some of the greatest things that have been achieved in life came in a time of hardness, when people were struggling. The loss of a body member. Beethoven became blind at 28, unable to see the works that he was writing, and then became deaf, so he couldn't hear his beautiful music played. But he kept creating beautiful, beautiful music. And it was because of the loss of a couple members that he struggled so hard. The one that achieved the most in my brother's graduating class from high school was a woman who had contracted polio. And she was paralyzed from the neck down. There were long days in the iron lung, but what she got to be doing was writing children's stories. She wrote it with the pen in her mouth and writing on a piece of paper with her head driving the pen. She never complained about what she had. And when she was asked why she was doing what she did, she said, you know, people think this is such a curse, but I get such a reward from this habit that I had to pick up as a part of my disease. And it is so joyful writing for children and getting letters back telling me how they are moved by my poetry. I have to admit that some of the most productive times in my life were when I was struggling the most. And sometimes when I had it so easy, were some of the least productive. You can't imagine that God might have put something there to make you struggle a little harder and maybe achieve a little more. And then the other problem with fairness is that it indicates that we have some kind of idea that we're entitled to things. And that really causes us problems. We got it in our Constitution. There's certain inalienable rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Who guaranteed that? The politician says every person in this country has a right to good health care. Really? Just entitled? Don't we have to do something to earn? Once we start thinking that God owes us something because of our holiness, or because what we have done, or that we have just been faithful church members, when we start thinking that, we really go down the wrong street and get involved in selfishness and arrogance. So if we come to Jesus and saying, why are you putting me through this kind of turmoil? It's just not fair. Maybe he's saying, are you really there to tell me what I should do with what is really mine? Because in the end, the parable was not about great achievements, earnings, merit, laws, privileges, or benefits. It's about grace and acceptance and inclusiveness. There's no room in God's kingdom for resentment, selfishness, or arrogance. We're taking in some new members today. We take you in as new members because you saw this as some place you might spend some time and grow together with others in faith. You become members and you're entitled to all the privileges that those have been here since the day they were born. Well, it's a privilege, but it's one that's given freely. It might not be fair that you have the same voice in a vote that somebody who's been here 40 years is, but that's part of the benefit. Of course, they'll say that you have the same responsibilities. That's true too. But it's a part of the grace of God. It's inclusion and acceptance. So the question you asked this morning, is God fair? I can't answer that because of the reasons I gave. One thing I know, that when I asked God about his fairness, he said, say, I gave you a brain. And generally I find if I get rid of the arrogance, if I get rid of the selfishness, I find a lot more fairness than I've seen before. Is God fair? It's your question to answer. Amen. Now, what I read in the bulletin, actually what we're going to do, we're going to 3 hymns that we choose, 2 verses apiece. And out of which hymn book? The red one. Maybe you saw that in the order of service. Does somebody want to ask for a particular hymn? 2 hymns. Or 3 hymns. 2 verses. 781. 781.
children of the Heavenly Father.
Good one for today.